The Lives of the Saints by Father Alban Butler. March 15th, St. Clement Mary Hofbauer. St. Clement Mary Hofbauer is sometimes called the second founder of the Redemptorists because he was the first to establish the congregation of St. Alphonsus Liguori north of the Alps. He, more than any other, brought about the downfall of Josephinism, that Austrian equivalent of Erastianism, which treated ecclesiastics as functionaries of the state and subject to secular power. He was born in 1751 in Moravia and was baptized with the Christian name of John. He was the 9th of 12 children of a herdsman and butcher who had changed his Slavic surname from Dvorak to the German equivalent Hofbauer. As a young boy, he longed to become a priest, but poverty stood in his way, and at the age of 15, he earned his living as a baker's apprentice. Later, he was employed in the bakery of the Premonstratensian monastery of Bruck, where his selflessness during a time of famine won him the sympathy of the abbot, who allowed him to attend Latin classes in the school attached to the abbey. After the abbot's death, the saint lived as a solitary, until Emperor Joseph's edict against hermits forced him to return to his former occupation, this time in Vienna. Twice he made pilgrimages to Rome from that city in the company of his friend Peter Kunzmann, and on the second occasion they obtained permission from Bishop Chiaramonti of Tivoli, later Pope Pius VII, to establish themselves as hermits in his diocese. A few months later, however, it occurred to him that his work should be that of a missionary, not that of a solitary, and so he returned to Vienna. One day, after he had assisted at Mass in St. Stephen's Cathedral, he offered to procure a carriage for two ladies who had taken refuge in the vestibule when it rained, and this casual service led to the realization of his heart's desire, for the two ladies discovered that he had not the means to pursue studies for the priesthood and offered to pay for them, not only for him, but also for his friend Thaddeus Heibel. Since the University of Vienna was infected by rationalist teaching, they returned to Rome, and there they experienced the attraction to the Redemptorists, and both asked to be admitted to the novitiate. St. Alphonsus himself, who was still alive, was overjoyed to learn that there were some newcomers from the north envisioning the establishment of his congregation in Austria. The two friends were professed and ordained in 1875. John Hofbauer, then 34 years old, received the sacrament and took the name Clement. He and Thaddeus were immediately sent to Vienna, but in view of the fact that Emperor Joseph II, not content with the expulsion of the Jesuits, had already suppressed several monasteries belonging to various orders, it was useless to think of making a new foundation there. His superiors then commissioned Clement to begin a mission in the Kurland region, and he set out for the north, accompanied by Thaddeus Heibel. On the way, St. Clement met his old friend Emanuel Kunzmannen, who was still living as a hermit in Tivoli, but was then on pilgrimage. The meeting seemed providential. Kunzmann resolved to join the two missionaries as a lay brother, and thus became the first Redemptorist novice admitted north of the Alps. In Warsaw, the papal nuncio placed the church of St. Benno at the disposal of the travelers. There were several thousand German Catholics in the city who, since the suppression of the Society of Jesus, had no German-speaking priests. In his anxiety to retain the Redemptorists, the nuncio wrote to Rome and obtained a postponement of the mission in Kurland in view of the great work in Warsaw. The missionaries began their task in the greatest poverty. They had no beds. Clement and Thaddeus slept on a chair. They borrowed cooking utensils, and as the lay brother did not know anything about cooking, Clement found it necessary to help him. In the early days they preached in the streets, but when the government prohibited open-air sermons, they remained in the church of St. Benno, which became the center of a continuous mission. Between the years of 1789 and 1808, the work done by St. Clement and his companions was extraordinary. 5 sermons were preached each day, 3 in Polish and 2 in German, since although St. Clement's work was mainly dedicated to the Germans, he wished to help everyone, and the work among the Poles received great impetus after the first Polish novice, John Podgorski, was admitted. The Church of the Holy Cross in the Fields was given to Clement and cared for from St. Benno. Numerous Protestants were attracted to the church, and St. Clement was especially successful in the conversion of the Jews. In addition to this apostolic ministry, the saint carried on a great social work. The constant wars had left the lower classes in misery, and the condition of many children was worthy of compassion. To help them, he opened an orphanage near the church of St. Benno and collected alms for their support. On one of his forays to solicit help, a man playing cards in a tavern answered his request by spitting in his face. St. Clement, undeterred, said, "That was a personal gift to me. Now please give me something for my poor children." The man who had insulted him later became one of his regular penitents. A school for children was also founded, while confraternities and other associations helped to ensure the continuance of the good work begun. As his community grew, he began to send out missionaries and to establish houses in Kurland, as well as in Poland, Germany, and Switzerland. But all of them had to be eventually abandoned due to the difficulties of the time. After 20 years of intense work, St. Clement had to leave, also his work in Warsaw, as a result of Napoleon's decree suppressing religious orders. The year before, the saint had lost his beloved friend, Father Hubel, who died of typhus, contracted while administering the last sacraments to some Italian soldiers. A police officer risked his life to warn the Redemptorists that they were threatened with expulsion. They were thus able to prepare to receive the official notification, which arrived on July 20th, 1908. They immediately surrendered to the authorities, who imprisoned them in the Sistrin fortress on the banks of the Oder. The influence of the Redemptorists among those who knew them was so great that groups formed daily, inside and outside the fortress, to hear them sing hymns until the authorities decided to send them away so that there would not be so many conversions. It was decided that the community should be dissolved and that each member should return to his native country. However, St. Clement determined to settle in Vienna, hoping to found a religious house there in case the laws of Joseph II were repealed. After great difficulties, including another imprisonment at the Austrian border, he managed to reach the city where he was to live and work for the last 12 years of his life. At first, he worked obscurely among the Italians living in Vienna, but soon after, the Archbishop appointed him chaplain to the Ursuline nuns and rector of the church attached to their convent. There he was free to preach, hear confessions, and fulfill all his priestly duties. And soon, from this center, new vigor was injected into religious life in Vienna. His confessional was materially besieged, not only by the poor and simple people, but by ministers of state and university professors. As one of his biographers remarks, by the sheer force of his holiness, he, a man who had been denied the opportunity to acquire broad intellectual culture, had such ascendancy over the thinking of his contemporaries that he was regarded as an oracle of wisdom by those at the head of the intellectual movement, both in the political and literary world. It was, in fact, St. Clement Mary Hofbauer, his friends and his penitents, among whom was Prince Ludwig of Bavaria, who prevented at the Congress of Vienna the attempt to create a German national church independent of the Roman pontiff. The saint was especially interested in the spread of good literature, but perhaps his crowning work was the establishment of a Catholic college, which became an invaluable gift to Vienna, since besides providing many priests and nuns, it gave well-educated laymen who later occupied important positions in all civil careers. Throughout his life, St. Clement had great devotion to the sick, whom he consoled with his word. It is said that he visited 2,000 sick on his deathbed. The rich and the poor sought him out, and he never neglected a call. He had special friendship with the Catholic Armenian Mekhitarist monks who came to Vienna, and in his dealings with the Protestants, he was greatly helped by the idea that, as he wrote in a letter to Father Perthus in 1816, if the Reformation in Germany grows and is sustained, it is not precisely by heretics and philosophers, but by men who were truly ambitious for an inner religion. In spite of his good works and his apostolic spirit, St. Clement was the object of frequent persecutions by the edicts to Josephinism, and the police kept him under constant surveillance. He referred in 1818 that pietism and fanaticism were becoming fashionable. However, the confessional is the opposing factor that keeps this fashion alive, and it seems indeed that his work as confessor and director was the main source of influence that made St. Clement Hofbauer the Apostle of Vienna. He was once forbidden to preach, and his opponents, after failing in their attempts before the Congress of Vienna, accused him of being a spy who reported to Rome all that was done in the empire. The Chancellor of Austria asked if he might be expelled, but Francis I received such good reports about Clement, given by the Archbishop and by Pope Pius VII, that he not only forbade any future molestation of the Redemptorists, but, in an interview with the saint, spoke to him encouragingly of the probabilities of a legal recognition of his congregation. The saint had practically achieved his two main goals. The Catholic faith was on the rise once again, and his beloved congregation was about to be firmly rooted on German soil. He did not live to see his hopes realized, but he was fully satisfied. The affairs of the congregation will not be settled until after my death, he said. One has only to have patience and trust in God, as soon as I have breathed my last breath, when we shall have houses in abundance. The prophecy was soon to be fulfilled. Near the end of his life, in 1819, St. Clement was suffering from various illnesses, but he worked as hard as ever. On March 9th, he insisted on walking in spite of a snowstorm to sing a requiem mass for the soul of Princess Jablonowska, who had helped him greatly when he was living in Warsaw. He nearly fainted at the altar and, on returning home, fell into bed, from where he never got up again. There, 6 days later, he breathed his last in the presence of many of his friends. The whole of Vienna thronged the streets to pay homage to him when his body was carried by 12 of his dearest disciples into the cathedral through the great doors, which were only opened on the most solemn occasions. He was canonized in 1909.